Good morning, Rabbi. We are continuing on Masechet Berachot of Mem Tet Amud Aleph, 2 dots in the middle of the page, almost upper one third in, and the limud of Amud Yomi for Chodesh Tevet has been dedicated by Shahab and Rabbi for health, happiness, and prosperity of their family. It has been also dedicated to Refuah Shlema of Rachel Bat Miriam, that should have a Refuah Shlema. Amen. Tanu Rabbanan, the Gemara says, Mahu Chotem. So what is the Chatima of the last biblical bracha, the third bracha of Birkat HaMazon? Says the Gemara, according to the Shita of the Rif, we're going to read this. Bonei Yerushalayim. Just like we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Bonei Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda holds, you say Moshiach Yisrael. Now, if you remember, in the last shiur we had on the top of this Amud, that Rab Abba said, if a person says Moshiach Yisrael, he's a bur, he's a amaretz. I remember if you take a look at the 5th line of the Amud, the kol hachotem manchil aratzot bebirkat haaretz u'moshiach et Yisrael bebonei Yerushalayim arei ze bur. There are different ways of understanding this based on Rishonim. If this is the actual machloket, if it's not a machloket, it's talking about saying 1 out of 2 versus saying 2. But be that as it may, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, you say Moshiach Yisrael. So says the Gemara, Moshiach Yisrael in binyan Yerushalayim lo. You're posing this as a machloket, as if to say there is a machloket. Tarakama says you say Bori Yerushalayim, and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says Moshiach Yisrael, as if Moshiach Yisrael it's fine, but Bori Yerushalayim it's not fine. Is that correct? Is there anybody that says if you say Bori Yerushalayim you're not good? Says the Gemara. In other words, the second shita Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds, not only you could finish saying, you could end the bracha saying Bonei Yerushalayim, but if you didn't say Bonei Yerushalayim, you said Moshiach Yisrael instead, still is good. Why is this, by the way? Just a little background. The bracha starts with Lachem Hashem al Yisrael Amecha Val Yerushalayim Irecha. There's 2 elements that are mentioned in the beginning of the bracha, and every bracha has to end me'ena pticha. In Shemona Esrei also is the same way. You start Atah Chonen Adam Dat, Baruch Atah Hashem Chonen Dat. Every bracha starts with the concept and ends with that same concept. So the bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim starts with Al Yisrael Amecha, Val Yerushalayim Irecha. There's 2 concepts over here. So how do you end it? So Tarakama says you say Bori Yerushalayim, and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says you say Moshiach Yisrael. Each one of them is ending with one of those 2 elements that the bracha started with. But that's the core concept of the machloket. That's the core of the machloket is whether or not Moshiach Yisrael, which ends me'ena pticha of Al Yisrael Amecha, would be sufficient. So says the Gemara story. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna ikla leberesh galuta. Rabbi Bar Huna was hosted by the Resh Galuta, and he ate and he benched patach bechada v'siyem betarti. He started with one of those 2 things, and he ended up with both. In other words, he did not say Al Yisrael Amecha Val Yerushalayim Irecha. He said only one of those 2 things, elements of Yerushalayim and Yisrael, but he ended the bracha, not just Bonei Yerushalayim, but he ended saying both of them, Moshiach et Yisrael u Bonei Yerushalayim. He ended the bracha like that with both of the endings. So Amar Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda says, "Wow, Gevurta lemichtam betarti? You think it's a big deal to end the bracha with 2? The Hatanya. If anything, on the contrary, we learned in the Braita, Rabbi Omer en chotmim b'shtayim. Rabbi said you should not end a bracha with 2 different endings. You're not supposed to do that. So you think it's a good thing you did to cover all your bases, but really Rabbi says you should not end with two different things. By the way, once we're at this, when we have the bracha l'minim v'mashirim, right? The ending of that bracha, if it's shover oivim machnia zedim or minim, is of course a machloket that most of you, if not all of you, know about. The Ashkenazim, the nusach is zedim. The old Sephardi minhag also was zedim, at least in the eastern parts, the Middle East. Certainly, the minhag was like the geonim and the sidur of Rav Amram Gaon, Rav Sadia Gaon. I found in two different sources from 500 years ago that some travelers, halachic travelers, they went through different cities in Iran, including Shiraz, other places, and they say the nusach of the tefillah that they had was following the nusach of the sidur of Rav Sadia Gaon, which, of course, Rav Sadia Gaon sidur has shover oivu machnia zedim, and that is mentioned in 3 places in Yerushalmi, and more than that in the Midrash, has many different sources in halacha. And minim, on the other hand, Maran Chida used to say it like that in his Sefer Sipor and Shamir. He speaks about this in a one-liner, in the Ben Ish Chai, Ben Yoyada speaks about it in our Masechta, in Masechet Berachot, by the bracha of minim, Shmuel HaKatan, as we spoke about it before. So some say they want to cover all their bases, and they say shover oivu machnia minim zedim, right? So that's not necessarily a right thing to do. Because again, you see from the Gemara, again, here is one inyan really. It's the same concept, but to say two things and try to cover the bases, which that girsa never existed. It's not that you're covering A and B. You created a monster, so to speak, that didn't exist before. Minim zedim is none of the nuschaot. So the proper thing, of course, would be halachically to say shover oivu machnia zedim. But that's just in parentheses. So Gufa, the Gemara goes back to this very discussion of Rabbi. Rabbi Omer en chotmin b'shtayim. Rabbi says you do not end the bracha with saying two different things together. So says the Gemara, itaveh Levi leRabbi. Levi asked the Rabbi Yudanasi, this question. He said, wait a second, we say ala aretz v'ala mazon. Ala aretz v'ala mazon sounds to me like two things. You're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Eretz Yisrael and also for the Mazon. It's the second bracha of Birkat HaMazon, right? You're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for both things. So why is that not considered two things? So says the Gemara, no. Rabbi would answer, Eretz the Mafka Mazon. We're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu on one thing, and that is Eretz Yisrael and its fruits that it produces. So it's one thing. It's not two different things. Same thing is, the Gemara asks, Al ha'aretz v'al ha'perot, when you say in the bracha mein shalosh on the 5 fruits that Eretz Yisrael has been praised by, when you say Al ha'aretz v'al ha'perot, the Gemara answers, it's not two things. Eretz the mafka perot is the Eretz Yisrael that produces those specific amazing fruits. Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim, when you say, oh, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim, you're talking about the praise from Jews and Zmanim, right? And Yom Tov. So it says the Gemara, no. Yisrael the kachinhu lizmanim. We are praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu for sanctifying the Jewish nation who sanctifies the times. In other words, it is in the hand of the Bedin to announce the Chodesh, right? The Rosh Chodesh does not become sanctified until the Bedin announces it, right? That's, by the way, the reason in parentheses that on Rosh Chodesh day, if you miss Ya'aleh V'Yavo, you have to return and daven again if you completely missed it. On Rosh Chodesh night of Rosh Chodesh, if you miss Ya'aleh V'Yavo, you don't go back. Why? Because the Bedin would not announce the Rosh Chodesh at night, and hence it depends on the announcement of the Bedin, and you don't go back because of that. So Yamim Tovim also depend on that. If Rosh Chodesh Nisan, for instance, you announce it tomorrow instead of today, Pesach would be, right, 15 days from now in the evening instead of 14 days from now in the evening. So Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim, the Zmanim, the Muadim, Rashi Chodashim, and the Yamim Tovim all depend on Israel because they have to sanctify the moon, the month. So therefore, the Gemara says one thing, both of them. And same is with Mekadesh Yisrael v'Rashi Chodashim, as we explained just now. Yisrael the Katshin Hu Rashi Chodashim. We are thanking Hashem for one thing, that's the sanctified Am Yisrael who are Mekadesh Rashi Chodashim. The Gemara says, okay, I'm gonna catch you on one thing that you can't answer, because we say Mekadesh HaShabbat veYisrael ve'Azmanim. If you have Shabbat and Zmanim fall on the same day, then the bracha that we end is Mekadesh Yisrael Shabbat veYisrael ve'Azmanim. So that you cannot say is the same thing, because Shabbat does not wait for you. You don't sanctify. Shabbat is there. It's fixed. It's not moving anywhere. So you say Mekadesh Yisrael, Mekadesh Shabbat v'Yisrael v'Azmanim. That's two different things. Says the Gemara, Chutz Mizu. Aside from that, this is an exception. Taka, in other words, the Gemara says yes. Rabbi agrees that there is an exception to the rule, and this is the exception. But aside from this, we don't end with two things. So Gemara says, wait a second, what's the difference? Why this yes and the other ones no? My Shina. Says the Gemara, Ha-cha-chadahi, hatam tarti. Here is one, over there is two. That means here we're saying one bracha, but you say Mekadesh, HaShabbat v'Azmanim, and that is the same thing. It's Shabbat and Zmanim. But Moshiach Yisrael and Borei Yerushalayim, they're two different things. Moshiach Yisrael is one thing, Borei Yerushalayim is a different thing. Here, at least you're saying, Hashem, you have given us special times, Shabbat, Muadim. It's one thing. Mekadesh HaShabbat, Yisrael Vazmanim. It's one concept, it's one group. So therefore, this is the exception to the rule. This is how Rashi understands it. There are others who explain it differently. Rashi brings it and rejects it. Says the Gemara. Kol chadam v'chada ba'pei nafsha. Each one of them is the Moshiach Yisrael and Bonei Yerushalayim. Each one is by itself. Why is it that we don't want to mention two different things in the Chatima, in the ending of the bracha? You don't want to do mitzvot in piles. You want every mitzvah to have its own identity. So you don't want to mention two completely separate praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in one bracha, in one ending of a bracha. Therefore, we don't do it like that, right? So says the Gemara, "My have ale." So what's the halacha then? How do we end it? Amar Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet says, "Patach berachem alamecha Yisrael." It depends how you start the beginning. If you start the beginning with saying Al Yisrael Amecha, without saying Al Yerushalayim Yirecha, then in the ending also you say Me'ena Beracha, Me'ena Pticha, Chotem b'Moshiach Yisrael. You end also with the same praise of Moshiach Yisrael. Patach berachem al Yerushalayim Yirecha. If you say the Pticha of the bracha, the beginning, with a praise of Rachem al Yerushalayim Yirecha, then Chotem b'Bonei Yerushalayim. Then you end also Me'en HaPeticha with Bonei Yerushalayim. First wide line. But Rav Nachman says no. This was Rav Sheshet. Rav Nachman says, Afilu patach berachem al Yisrael, even regardless of how you start, whether you start by Rachem al Yisrael Amecha or al Yerushalayim Yirecha, or both, doesn't make a difference. Chotem b'Bonei Yerushalayim. You end Bonei Yerushalayim. Why is that? Because Bonei Yerushalayim is considered the main ending, and it covers also Al Yisrael Amecha. Because what do you want to say? Moshiach et Yisrael, Hashem saves and redeems Am Yisrael from the Galut at the end. That's the bracha, right? So it says the Gemara, Mishum Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem, Nitchei Yisrael Yechanes. The pasuk in Tehillim says Hashem builds Yerushalayim and he gathers all of the scatteredness of the galut of Bnei Yisrael over there. In other words, the Binyan Yerushalayim is an all-inclusive bracha. You could have Jews in Israel without Beit HaMikdash, but you can't have Binyan Beit HaMikdash without the gathering of the Jews. So when you end Bonei Yerushalayim, included in that is Nitchei Yisrael Yechanes, Moshiach et Yisrael is included in Bonei Yerushalayim. So says Rabbi Nachman, regardless of how you started, you end only with one bracha, and that is Bonei Yerushalayim. He rejects the ending of Moshiach et Yisrael, and that is the halach. Says the Gemara, explains the pasuk. When does Hashem build back Yerushalayim? When He gathers all the scatteredness of the galut of Am Yisrael from all over the place. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rav Chisda. Rabbi Zera told Rav Chisda, Neti mar venitni, please, the rabbi should come and teach us something. Amar le, he said, I can't teach you. Birkat mezona lo gemirna v'tanuye matnina. He was upset at himself, Rav Chisda. He said, I don't even know how to bench, and you want me to come teach you Torah? So says Rabbi Zera, Amar le, my heart, what happened to you? What's this? Says the Gemara, Amar le, the iklai le beresh galuta. In this staff, everyone is invited to Resh Galuta. He says, I was by the Resh Galuta, Brichi Birkat Mezona, and I benched Birkat Hamazon, Vezakvi Rav Sheshet lekoeh alai, and Rav Sheshet straightened his neck over me like a snake, giving me that daggering look of me making a mistake. We mentioned before, Rav Chisda, Rav Sheshet, they were good friends, great friends, and each one of them was scared of the other one because each one had a talent the other one was missing, and each one, their talent was the top-notch talent in their own area. Rav Chisda was Oker Harim. He was a tremendously sophisticated mind that he would uproot the mountains with his svara, with the koach of his lamdut. And Rav Sheshet was Sinai. He was the greatest baki in his time. He knew everything by heart. So he may not have been a sophisticated mind like Rav Chisda, but his memory included all of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. He knew it on his fingertips. Rav Chisda was, on the other hand, a tremendously sophisticated mind of a lamdan, and each one of them completed basically the other one. We had a Gemara above that, how each one of them said that they two together could be considered three to bench together. It's the Gemara that we had. So here we have the other side of the coin, how the fear that they had from each other came very true in this story, that he said a benching, and Rav Sheshet gave him the looks that you made a massive mistake here, right? So what was the mistake? Ve'amar, I said, the Gemara says, what, and why was it? Meaning Rav Zera says, what happened? What mistake did he make? Says the Gemara, Rav Chisda answers, "Lo amri lo prit velo Torah velo malchut." I did not say in the bracha al haaretz v'al hamazon. We said in the Gemara before, if you don't say berit v'torah, you're not yotze. You remember that Gemara? We mentioned berit v'torah. Brit has 13 covenants on it. Torah has 3, right? You have to say brit, al britcha shchatamtu b'sarenu, al toratcha shelimatanu. You have to and say, I didn't say Brit and Torah, and in the Bracha Bonei Yerushalayim, I did not mention the Malchut of Bet David, right? So says the Gemara, Amai lo Amrat. So Rav Zera tells him, so why did you miss that? Why you know that there is such a shita? So why would you miss it? He knew that it's not just Rav Chisda holding, says, I forgot it. It's not that he forgot it. What happened? Says the Gemara, because I said it like Rav Hananel in the name of Rav. The Amar Rav Hananel, Amar Rav. Rav Hananel said in the name of Rav, Lo Amar Brit v'Torah, u'malchut yatsa. If you didn't say Brit and Torah and Malchut, you're still yotze. Why? Because Brit lefi she'ena benashim. Because, well, you have one text for benching. You can't have two different texts or three different texts, one for man, one for woman, one for avadim. And Brit, women don't have. Torah u'malchut lefi she'enan lo benashim v'lo ba'avadim. And Torah u'malchut, but David, you don't have by nashim and by avadim, right? The Ravad, by the way, asks this question. Rashba brings the Ravad over here. He says, if that's correct, so Eretz Yisrael also, when you say Al Haaretz V'al Hamazon, they can't say, Eretz Chemdat She'in Chalta L'Avotenu. Eved cannot say that. Rashba says that's not an answer. That's not a question, Rashba says. So because that is the main text of the bracha, is biblical, we said before, Al Haaretz V'al Hamazon. So you can't skip that. But in Yanim, things that you mentioned in the middle of text of the bracha, those are not biblical. So that has to be a text that makes sense for everyone to say. And Nashim don't have Brit. Avadim don't have Torah. Nashim and Avadim don't have Torah and don't have Malchut. Bet David. So says Gemara, Rabbi Zera surprisingly asks Rabbi Chisda, says, what? Ve'at shavkat kol ha'ali Tanai va'amorae. You left all of the Tanaim and Amoraim that we mentioned before, and you followed the Shita of Rav? What are you doing? Okay, so you found the Rav Chanan el Amar Rav that says that, but how about the majority of the Shitot that we learned before? The Avtat Karav. So the Gemara leaves it, on a high and dry, basically. It says, that's the story. Rav Chisda made this mistake. He admitted it, and Rav Zera told him, what in the world did you do? You don't leave all of the Tanaim and Amoraim and go do like one Shita. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Barachana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Hatova metiv sricha malchut. You remember we before had a machloket Tanaim as to whether or not the fourth bracha Birkat Hamazon is the Oraita or the Rabbanan, and we mentioned the main nafkamina would be if the last bracha of Hatova metiv is the Oraita, it will be considered a bracha hasmucha lechaverta. It would be an adjacent bracha to its friend, and therefore you would not need to start it with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Just like the second bracha doesn't start with that. We start Nodeh Lecha Hashem Elokeinu. The third bracha doesn't start with the Baruch. We start Rachem, because they're bracha smucha lechaverta. So if this also would be in the same category of those brachot, namely would be a Doraita bracha, would also start without Shem U'Malchut. But if it's a rabbinic bracha, so it's a different category, would start with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. So here, the Gemara says, Rabba Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said that Hatov Ha'metiv has to start with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, which indicates that's a rabbinic bracha. So says the Gemara, but it's more than that. My Kamashmalan, what is the chidush of this Rabba Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? We already know this. Kol bracha she'en ba malchut lashma bracha. If the chidush is that any bracha that doesn't have malchut is not considered a bracha, that we already know. Rabbi Yochanan said it already. V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan chatazimna. Rabbi Yochanan already has said any bracha that doesn't have malchut in it is not a bracha. So what's the chidush of this teaching of Rabba Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you what the chidush is. Amar Reb Zera, lomar shesricha shte malchuyot. It's coming to tell you that you need to mention malchut of Hashem twice in the fourth bracha. By the way, we do that actually, right? Because we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, right? And then the text of the actual bracha starts with what? HaMelech HaTov VaHaMetiv Lakol, right? The bracha of HaTov VaHaMetiv starts with HaMelech HaTov VaHaMetiv Lakol. So we say HaMelech again. So why do you need twice, by the way? Says the Gemara, one for itself, and one making up for Bonei Yerushalayim that doesn't have the Malchut. The Gemara says, wait a second. Ihachi, once you add it and you're giving free Malchuts for other brachot that didn't have it, so what? How about the second bracha? You telling me that we didn't have Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam in the bracha Bonei Yerushalayim? Yeah, but so we didn't also in the bracha of Nodelecha, in Ha'aretz V'Hamazon. We just mentioned that it's bracha Smucha Lechaverta, and you don't start it with bracha. So what's epis? Why is it that you're making up for the third bracha, but you're not making up for the second bracha? If you're at it already, so why don't you mention 3 times Malchut? We should require 3 times. The Gemara says, one for itself, one for Bnei Yerushalayim, and one for Haaretz, because that also didn't have Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. Says the Gemara, Ela Birkat Haaretz Ma'tamalo. Why is it that Birkat Haaretz you don't need? Mishum dehavi ala bercha semucha lechaverta. Because it's considered the bracha hasemucha lechaverta, and it does not need Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam in the beginning. So says the Gemara, so too should be Bonei Yerushalayim Nami. Also, Lotibai shouldn't need the Havyala Bracha Semucha Lechaverta. That also is a Bracha Hasemucha Lechaverta. So the Gemara says, yes, you're right. Technically speaking, you're correct. Hu hadin da'afilu Bonei Yerushalayim Nami Lobai. Be'emet, Bonei Yerushalayim also doesn't need it, because it is bracha semucha lechaverta. So why do I tell you that you should make up for the malchut of Bonei Yerushalayim, even though that it doesn't need it? Says the Gemara, Ela Aidi de Amar Malchut BeDavid, because in the third bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim you mention malchut of Bet David. It's not respectful. It's not derech eretz not to mention malchut of Hashem. So you can't mention malchut of Hashem in that same bracha, because it's a bracha semucha lechaverta, which goes without malchut. So therefore, you make up for that in the fourth bracha, right? So in other words, essentially, you don't need it. In the structure of the bracha, Bonei Yerushalayim does not require malchut because it's a bracha semucha lechaverta. But out of derech eretz, out of properness, when you mention the malchut and you praise the malchut of Bet David, it's not right that you shouldn't mention and praise Malchut of Hashem. So therefore, we say Haberech Hatov to mention that, to make it up. Lav orach ara delo amar Malchut Shamayim. So that's one understanding. Rav Papa says a different understanding. Hachi Kamar. This is what he's saying. Sricha shte malchuyot levad midida. That's exactly what he meant to say. Rav Archana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Zera's understanding of that is that you need to say 2 malchuyot aside from its own malchut. In other words, you are making up for all of the brachot that you didn't say malchut. You're saying malchut 3 times in the fourth bracha of Hatov V'Ametiv. Fine. Story again. Yativ Rab Zera chored Rab Gidel. Rab Zera was sitting behind Rab Gidel. V'yativ Rab Gidel was sitting in front of Rab Huna. V'yativ v'kamar, and he said, Ta v'lo yiskil shel Shabbat. What happens if you made a mistake as you're saying Birkat Hamazon and you missed Retzeh v'achalitzenu? You forgot to say Retzeh. You didn't mention Shabbat's insertion inside the Birkat Hamazon. What do? Omer, you make up for it. You say a specific bracha of Baruch Shenatan Shabbatot Limnucha Le'amo Yisrael Ba'ahava Le'ot Ve'Librit Baruch Ata Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. You say an entire bracha if you missed benching, right? If you take a look at your regular Sidurim, they actually have this. If you take a look right after the bracha Bonei Yerushalayim, it will have an insertion there that if you forgot to say Retzeh v'achalitzenu, then you will say this very bracha that the Gemara just mentioned in our daf. See, right after Birkat Bonei Yerushalayim, over here, they have in the Sidur that if you missed it, you will say this very bracha. Trying to find this. No, surprisingly, this I can't find it in, but regular ones should have it. It's the same exact bracha that we have in the Gemara, almost verbatim, is mentioned in the Sidurim for when you miss it. Here it says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shenatan Shabbatot limnucha la'amo Yisrael ba'ahava, le'ot ve'livrit, Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Shabbat. Right? A separate, completely separate bracha for this. By the way, why is this not starting with a bracha? It's a bracha semucha lechaverta. Why do we start it with Baruch atah Hashem? Why? Because this is not a takana of Chazal that you should say it. It's a cover up for a mistake. Hopefully, you should never make a mistake. So therefore, does not follow the regular halachot of bracha semucha lechaverta because it's not something that was instituted to be said every time you bench. So therefore, you started with a bracha and you ended with a bracha as well. So says the Gemara, that's one thing that he heard when he was sitting in front of Rav Huna together with Rav Gidel, right? This is what he heard from Rav Gidel. So says the Gemara, Amar le man amara. He asked, so who said this bracha? He said Rav. He heard it in the name of Rav. Rav Gidel will say this in the name of Rav. Hadar Yati, first wide line, 4 lines up from the bottom. Yati v'kamar, he said again, Rav Gidel, Ta v'lo yizkir shel Yom Tov. How about if you forgot to say the insert that you have to put for Yom Tov? Then you say also a separate bracha. Baruch shenatan yamim tovim la'amo Yisrael, lesimcha v'lzikaron, Baruch mekadesh Yisrael v'azmani. Okay, Gavaldik. Amale man amara. He asked the same question again. Who said this bracha? Who said this chidush? He said Rav. Rav said it. Fine. You have that also in the Sidur over here. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shenatan yamim tovim la'amo Yisrael lesason u'lesimcha, and then you add et yom, either Chag HaMatzot, Chag HaSukkot, Chag Shavuot, depending on what you have, Shmini Atzeret, et yom mikra kodesh hazeh, Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Yisrael v'azmani. Right? So that's also the halacha.
It's also post.
That's correct. We're going to get to that just in a moment. Says the Gemara, Hadar Yati v'kamar, he said again, Ta v'lo yizkir shalosh chodesh, Omer Baruch shenatan Rashe chodashim la'amo Yisrael. If you forgot Rosh Chodesh, then you just say Baruch shenatan Rashe chodashim la'amo Yisrael lezikaron. And then he says, Rabbi Zera says, I don't remember what he said exactly. I don't remember if he had a word of simcha mentioned in there or not. I don't remember if he ended with a Baruch atah Hashem or not. And I don't remember if it was his chidush or his Rebbe's chidush Rav. Those I don't remember. Right? What's the halacha? The halacha is that we don't say any of those things. We just say exactly like what the Gemara said. Baruch shenatan Rashe chodashim la'amo Yisrael lezikaron. No bracha. What's the difference? The difference is that Rosh Chodesh is not as important as Yamim Tovim or Shabbat, as we're going to see momentarily in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, last line. Gidel bar min Yomi ha'awakai hameh to Rav Nachman, standing in front of Rav Nachman. Ta Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman made a mistake in Birkat Hamazon. He forgot to say Retzeh on Shabbat, and you know what he did? He went to the beginning of the Birkat Hamazon. So here, Gidel bar Rav is standing there. So wait a second. We just learned in the name of Rav Gidel, in the name of Rav, that you don't go back to the beginning of benching. You just say Baruch, the bracha of Shabbat. So he confronted Rav Nachman on that. So wait a second. Amaleh, my tama avid morachi. Why did you go back to the beginning of the Birkat Hamazon? Don't you know the chidush of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav that you just say this bracha special for Shabbat? Amaleh, he answered. He said, no. You're making a mistake. The Amar Rav Shilam, Amar Rav, Ta'ach Ozer Lerosh. He said, I have a bright thought that says, if you make a mistake, you miss Shabbat, let's say you go back to the beginning of it, the Birkat Hamazon. The Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Ta, Omer Baruch Shenatan, We just learned that Rav's teaching that if you missed Retzei, you just say Baruch Shenatan Shabbatot La'amo V'chule. Amaleh, Rav Nachman said, okay, you're missing one piece of the puzzle over here. Because Lav Itmar Allah, don't you know that it's said on this halacha in the name of Rav Menashe Bar Tachlifa, in the name of Rav himself, that Rav himself said, Lo shanu ela shelo patach ba'tov v'ametiv. This that you say, this bracha that we just read from the Sidur, that you make up for Reseh by saying, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shenatan shabbatot limucha la'amo Yisrael lo'od v'livrit, Baruch atah Hashem Mekadsh Shabbat. That is only when you ended up saying Borei Yerushalayim, without saying Reseh, and you haven't started Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam of La'ad Hakel Avinu, the bracha v'atov v'ametiv, you have not started yet. But if you already started La'ad Hakel Avinu, started bracha v'atov v'ametiv, then aval patach v'atov v'ametiv ozer lerosh. Then you go back to the very beginning of Birkat Hamazon, and that is the halacha. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. The whole chain of command in the name of Shmuel. If you missed the Ya'aleh v'yavo in Tefillah, you go back to the beginning of Tefillah, but Birkat Hamazon, you don't go back. So Rav Avin says to Rav Amram, Ma'ishana, what's the difference? Tefillah, and what's the difference Birkat Hamazon? What's the difference? Both of them are Doraita. If anything, Birkat Hamazon is more important, is biblical. Amaleh, after the Dikashnali. I also had the same question. Rav Nachman, and I asked this question to Rav Nachman, but Amali, he told me from the name of Shmuel himself, Lo Shmiali, I didn't hear it from Shmuel himself, and let us see what the difference is. Tefillah de Chovah hi machzirin oto. Tefillah is an obligation you have to daven on Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, you have to go back if you missed a part of that obligation. But Birkat Mezona, the Ibai Achil, Ibai Lo Achil, Birkat Hamazon is optional. You didn't have to eat Suda on Rosh Chodesh. You're not chayav to eat Suda. So therefore, if you missed Ya'aleh v'yavo, you don't go back. Says the Gemara. So if that's correct, Ma'ata Shabbatot Yamim Tovim de Lo Sagi de Lo Achil, Shabbat and Yom Tov, that you're obligated to eat the Suda. On Shabbat, 2 Seudot, 3 really, but at least 2. And on Yom Tov, also you have an obligation of Suda. De Lo Sagi de Lo Achil Hachinami. You're willing to say that if you missed Retzei, you go back and you have to say it again. The Itai Hadar Amaleh in said yes. The Amar Rabbi Shila Amar Rav Ta Chozer Lerosh. That if you make a mistake, then you go back to the beginning of Birkat Hamazon because the Seudah was an obligation. V'ha Rav Huna Amar Rav. And didn't we learn in the name of Rav Omer Baruch Shenatan? We say this insertion of this one bracha. If you missed it, and the Gemara answers the same exact answer. Lav Itmar Allah. Don't you know that we learned on that? Lo shanu ela shelo patach ba'atov v'ametiv. That's only if you didn't start atov v'ametiv. But if you already have started officially the 4th bracha of atov v'ametiv, then you have to go all the way back to the very beginning of Birkat Hamazon if you missed Retzei on Shabbat, because the Seudah of Shabbat is a chiyuv, it's an obligation. So therefore, it's not an optional thing. You have to eat bread, you have to bench, and hence you have to say Retzei. If you missed it, you have to repeat the Birkat Hamazon, Ma'ashe'enken on Rosh Chodesh, that the Seudah is not an obligation. If you missed the Ya'aleh v'yavo in Birkat Hamazon, you don't have to go back to the beginning of benching.
If soda should